Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be diving deep today into,
What a heavy topic.
yeah, I know, right? Um, how narcissists can exploit the trusting nature of autistic individuals, and specifically by playing the victim.
Definitely heavy stuff, but, important for people to understand and to be aware of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, that's why we do these deep dives, right? To kind of
Mhm.
help people understand these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And for this one, we're actually looking at a blog post from Cheap ABA.
Great site. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, they do some really awesome work.
They do. Making info about autism really accessible for everybody, and that's really important.
Yeah, it can be tough, especially if you're just starting to learn about autism to find reliable information. And they have so much of their website too.
Oh, tons. They cover the really basic stuff all the way up to, the more complex topics like the one we're talking about today. Right. And it can be overwhelming to sort through all of that,
Yeah.
right? To try and find, what you need for your specific situation. So you can kind of think of this deep dive as like a shortcut to the key insights from this particular post.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And that's where I come in, right, to help unpack all that.
Exactly. This blog post, it got me thinking, right? It's like, okay, it's not just about knowing about autism. It's about how that intersects with the psychology of manipulation. And that's where your expertise, I think, comes in really handy.
Right, we're going to break down what playing the victim means as a tactic, not as like a genuine cry for help,
Right. Yeah.
but like a way to manipulate people.
Exactly. And then why narcissists do it and why autistic individuals might be more susceptible to this. Because that's what really struck me about this cheap ABA post, right? It wasn't just, oh, here's how to recognize a narcissist. It was like, oh, this is why this particular tactic can be extra effective against autistic people, which I thought was really interesting. But before we get into the specifics of why autistic individuals might be more susceptible, how would you define playing the victim in this context?
It's basically putting on a performance, right? It's
Mm.
not genuine vulnerability. It's about creating this situation where they appear to be the one who's been wronged,
Yeah.
even if they're the ones causing the harm.
And that's a point that the blog post hits hard on. It's like, this is deliberate. This isn't an accident. This is a strategy.
Yeah, to get what they want.
Exactly.
It's a smokescreen to deflect blame, avoid responsibility, and ultimately get others to do what they want. And the scary part is they often even start to believe their own act. So it
Oh.
can be very convincing.
So it's not even just someone overreacting to a situation. It's a conscious act.
Mm.
What makes a narcissist want to play the victim? Like, what's the payoff for them?
Several things, actually. I have a little acronym
Ooh, I love an
I
acronym.
like to use to remember it. Escape,
Okay, escape. I like it. E is for...
ego boost. They need constant admiration, right? And being seen as this wronged party really feeds that.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
S is for sympathy.
Okay,
People naturally feel bad for victims.
right.
So this gives the narcissist the attention and support they crave.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. What about C?
C is for control, which is really the core of what they're trying to achieve, right? By positioning themselves as the victim, they get to control other people's actions, other people's emotions.
Sneaky A.
A is for avoiding accountability.
Okay, yeah.
We were talking about you can't be at fault if you're the one who's been hurt, right?
Right, exactly. And P.
P for projecting blame. So they shift the responsibility for their own mistakes or bad behavior onto somebody else, and it conveniently makes them look innocent in the process.
So it's not just about avoiding the consequences for themselves. It's about actively trying to blame someone else for what they've done. And this is where this gets really troubling, I think, because the blog post specifically addresses why autistic individuals might be more susceptible to this kind of manipulation.
Right, and that's a very important point. It's not about saying, autistic people are weak or anything like that. It's about how certain autistic traits can sometimes, be used against them in these situations.
So it's like their strengths are being twisted.
Right, exactly.
Okay. The post mentioned difficulty reading social cues as one factor, but could you elaborate a bit on that? What specific cues might be harder to pick up on that a narcissist might be exploiting?
Think about all those subtle things, like the inconsistencies between somebody's words and their body language, or their tone of voice, a forced smile, an overly dramatic sigh, even, fake crying,
Yeah.
crocodile tears. These can be tough to interpret for anyone, but especially for someone on the spectrum.
So they might not see through the performance.
Exactly. And because autistic people are often incredibly sincere and honest, they may just assume that everybody else is too,
Yeah.
So they're less likely to suspect that someone might be deliberately misleading them.
It's that desire for genuineness,
Yeah.
right? That makes them vulnerable. The post also mentions a strong desire to please others as a factor. How does that tie in?
Imagine, right, that you have someone who's constantly telling you that you're upsetting them, that you're not doing enough, that you're the cause of their problems. This could be very distressing for anyone, but especially for someone who wants to make other people happy.
Right, they're going to bend over backwards to try and fix it, right?
Exactly. And they might bend over backwards to try and please this person, but the goalposts keep moving. Right.
Right.
So you never quite get there.
It's a no-win situation.
Yeah.
And they're being exploited for that desire to create harmony. The post also talks about a sensitivity to criticism. How does that fit in here?
It goes back to that need for really clear communication, right? So when a narcissist uses really vague accusations or blames the autistic person for things that they have no control over, it can be incredibly difficult because it triggers those feelings of self-doubt, right? They might start questioning their own perception of reality, wondering if they are the problem.
It's that self-blame, right?
Right. And it can be very difficult to shake.
Yeah. Even when the criticism is unjustified, they might still internalize it. And finally, the post mentioned challenges with executive functioning. What are some of the challenges that might come up specifically in this context of playing the victim?
Setting boundaries, for example, and enforcing those boundaries, which anybody can struggle with this, especially in relationships where there's manipulation involved.
Right.
But for someone with executive functioning challenges, it can be even tougher. The narcissist will push those boundaries, constantly testing to see how far they can go.
So they're eroding those boundaries, right?
Exactly. They wear down their resistance through pressure, guilt trips, even threats sometimes.
And it makes it even harder for the autistic person to stand up for themselves.
Right. It chips away at that sense of self.
So we've now covered a lot of ground, like what playing the victim actually means, why a narcissist does it, and why autistic individuals might be more susceptible. But I think it would be helpful for our listeners to have like a really concrete, real-world example. Like, what does this actually look like when it's happening?
Okay. So let's say, right, that an autistic person is in a relationship with someone with NPD, and the narcissist loses their job. Instead of acknowledging, their own role in the situation, they might start blaming their partner, saying that, their autism-related traits somehow contributed to them losing their job.
So they're taking something that's a part of who they are and using it as a weapon against them. Exactly.
Oh, that's awful.
Right. And this is just one example. Or another one might be like a parent who has NPD blaming their autistic child's meltdown on intentional misbehavior, right?
Wow.
So they'll make a scene putting on the show of being the stressed out parent.
Oh, that's just hurt.
When the child is actually just overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's a really powerful image and really disturbing, honestly.
Yeah.
It just highlights how insidious this kind of manipulation can be. But I do want to say, before we go any further, these are just examples. Every situation is unique, right? And we don't want people to overgeneralize. So if this is sounding familiar, it's not necessarily a diagnosis. It's just something to be aware of.
Absolutely.
So we've laid the groundwork. We know what playing the victim is, why a narcissist does it, why autistic individuals might be more susceptible. But what can you actually do about it? Like, how can you recognize this when it's happening and then resist that manipulation? There are strategies, and we're going to get into that in a lot more detail after the break. But I think the most important thing for people to remember right now is you are not to blame.
That's so important.
For the narcissist's behavior. It's not your fault, and you don't have to fix it. You are not responsible for their behavior. You are only responsible for your own.
Right. It's about taking back that control. Right. But how do you escape that self-blame, especially when a narcissist is so good at making you feel responsible?
And that's where seeking external validation comes in, which is something that we're going to talk about a lot more when we come back. It's about getting that reality check from people you trust.
Okay, so stay tuned. We'll be right back to dive deeper into those practical strategies for recognizing and resisting manipulation. Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about how playing the victim is a tactic that narcissists use to manipulate people and why autistic individuals might be especially susceptible to it.
Yeah, we covered some heavy stuff, how narcissists can twist empathy and sincerity and use that against autistic people.
Right, exactly. And now I think we want to shift gears and focus on what can you do about it? What are the solutions?
Right. Let's talk solutions.
So you mentioned seeking external validation before the break.
Right.
What does that actually look like, in practice?
Think of it this way. A narcissist is kind of like a funhouse mirror. It's distorting your reflection, right? And they want you to doubt your perceptions, doubt yourself. External validation is like stepping outside into the sunlight where you can see yourself clearly again.
I love that analogy. So it's like getting perspective from people who are outside of that distorted reality.
Exactly. Talk to somebody you trust, a therapist, a friend, a family member, a mentor, someone who knows you well and will listen without judgment.
And what kind of things should you be talking about with them? Like, what are the things that they can help you with?
Share what's happening, how the narcissist is making you feel, the specific actions. Don't be afraid to get into the details.
Yeah.
Because sometimes just hearing yourself say it out loud can help you spot the inconsistencies or red flags. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like having someone else help you untangle a knot, right?
Yeah,
Like
kind
you
of.
know what's going on, but you can't quite see it for yourself because you're so in it.
Right, right.
And importantly, you said, ask for their honest feedback
Yes.
because they might notice things that you haven't.
Yep.
Or validate your concerns when the narcissist has been, making you doubt yourself.
Right.
Yeah, that outside perspective can be so grounding, especially when you've been gaslighted,
Oh, absolutely.
which I think is a perfect segue
Yes.
into another topic that we wanted to explore, gaslighting. Can you talk a little bit about what gaslighting is and how it relates to this?
Yeah, gaslighting is all about making you question your own sanity,
Mm-hmm.
your memories, your version of reality.
Yeah.
And it often goes hand in hand with playing the victim. And it can be so damaging.
So how would a narcissist use playing the victim to actually gaslight someone? Like, what would that look like?
They might deny things that happened, right?
Like, clearly happened. Or they might twist events to make themselves look good, or even accuse you of being the one causing the problems. Remember that example we were talking about before the break? With a narcissist blaming their partner's autism for them losing their job.
Right. It's like rewriting history.
It is rewriting history, yeah.
Yeah.
They create this narrative where they're the innocent victim and you're the problem.
And if you don't have that strong external validation, it can be really hard to hold on to your own truth, right?
Absolutely. It can be very convincing if you don't have those people to kind of check in with.
Yeah, so it's not just about remembering what happened. It's about trusting your own perceptions, even when someone is actively trying to undermine them.
Right.
That's scary.
Pay attention to that gut feeling, that sense of something isn't right,
Hmm.
even if you can't articulate it clearly.
Yeah.
And just remember, if someone consistently makes you feel confused, doubtful, or crazy, that's a major red flag.
Red flag noted.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about external validation, and we've touched a little bit on gaslighting. What about setting boundaries? The Sheep ABA post touched on that a little bit, but I think it's worth diving into a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think so too. Boundaries are your line in the sand, right?
Mm-hmm.
They define what you're willing to accept and what you're not. And with a narcissist, this is so crucial because they constantly test limits. They push to see how far they can go.
Yeah. But as we discussed, setting boundaries can be really challenging for autistic individuals, especially those who have executive functioning difficulties.
It's true, but it's not impossible,
Okay.
right? It starts with knowing your limits. What are those behaviors that are absolutely unacceptable to you? What are you willing to compromise on? And what are your non-negotiables?
So once you know your limits, what's next?
Communicate them clearly. And it doesn't have to be a confrontation.
Okay.
It can be as simple as saying, I'm not comfortable with that, or I need some space right now.
Right, but some people might find that really hard to do, right? To be that assertive, especially when you're dealing with someone who's used to getting their way.
Right. Well, practice helps.
Okay.
You can rehearse what you want to say in front of a mirror, or even role play with a trusted friend. The more you practice, the easier it will become in those real-life situations.
That's great advice, but what if the narcissist just doesn't respect those boundaries?
That's where enforcement comes in.
Okay.
If they cross a boundary, follow through with consequences.
Yeah.
And that might mean ending the conversation, leaving the room, even ending the relationship.
That sounds really tough, though, especially when it's someone you care about.
It's not easy,
Yeah.
but it's about prioritizing your well-being. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect, and your needs are valid.
And it sends a message, right?
Yes.
That you're not going to tolerate being mistreated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The narcissist might try to guilt trip you. They might play the victim even more, or even escalate the situation.
Yeah.
But you got to hold your ground.
Yeah.
Your mental health is worth protecting.
So we've talked about seeking external validation and setting boundaries. Are there any other strategies for resisting manipulation that you think our listeners should know about?
One that's often overlooked is prioritizing self-care.
Self-care.
Yeah. It might seem basic, but it's so crucial for building resilience against this kind of manipulation.
So what kind of self-care are we talking about here?
Anything that nourishes, your mind, body, and spirit. Think about what makes you feel good, what helps you de-stress, what brings you joy.
So it's not just, bubble baths and face masks.
Not necessarily, although those can be great.
Right.
It's more about being intentional about your well-being.
Yeah.
Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating nutritious foods? Are you engaging in activities that you enjoy?
So it's about creating that foundation of strength, right? And well-being, that makes it harder for the narcissist to chip away at you.
Exactly. When you're feeling good about yourself, it's easier to spot those red flags,
Right.
set boundaries, and resist the manipulation.
Yeah.
It's like putting on armor to protect yourself from all that negativity.
Yeah, it's all starting to make sense. It's like you're recognizing the manipulation, resisting the manipulation. It's multi-layered, right? Like you're building up your defenses.
Yes.
And your awareness.
It's a journey, not a quick fix. There will be setbacks, but the more you practice these strategies, the stronger you'll become.
And the more you'll be able to spot it, right? Like in all its forms, not just playing the victim, but all these other things that we've been talking about.
Right. Now that brings up an interesting question. If understanding playing the victim helps us identify this very specific tactic, could it also help us recognize other types of manipulation?
It's like learning a new language.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Once you know the basic grammar, you can start to understand like more complex sentences.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be exploring in the next part. We're going to delve into some other common manipulation tactics.
Okay.
And see how recognizing playing the victim can give you that framework for understanding them.
Awesome. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've been talking about how narcissists use playing the victim to manipulate and how autistic individuals might be especially vulnerable to it.
Yeah, and as we said before, this isn't just about this one specific tactic. It's about understanding like the bigger picture of manipulation.
Right. So you can spot it no matter what form it takes.
Exactly. It's about seeing those patterns, right? Recognizing the red flags, developing that internal alarm system.
Right.
That goes off when something feels off.
Yeah, like trusting your gut.
Yeah.
So that's why I think for this last part, we should talk about some other common manipulation tactics. Not just playing the victim,
right,
but other things that people might encounter. And how understanding playing the victim can actually give you like a framework to recognize these other types of manipulation.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Right. So what are some other, tactics that narcissists or really anyone who's manipulative might use?
One that we hear about a lot is emotional blackmail.
Emotional blackmail.
Yeah. It's all about using guilt, fear, or obligation to control someone's behavior.
Ooh, yeah. I can see how that ties into playing the victim, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like they might say things like, if you really loved me, you'd do this, or you're hurting me by not giving me what I want.
Exactly. They're leveraging their victimhood to pressure you into complying with their demands.
So they're holding their emotional well-being hostage, basically.
Right, and preying on your empathy.
Yeah.
Your desire to please others.
Which we talked about earlier. Okay, so emotional blackmail, noted. What's another one?
Triangulation is a big one.
Triangulation.
Yeah. That's when the narcissist brings in a third person into the dynamic to create conflict, to sow discord, control the flow of information.
So instead of having like a direct confrontation with you, they're trying to manipulate you through someone else.
Exactly. It might be confiding in a friend about how unreasonable you are.
Oh, yeah.
Or comparing you unfavorably to somebody else.
Yeah.
And this creates a sense of insecurity, doubt.
Yeah.
It makes you more dependent on the narcissist for validation.
I can see how that also ties back into playing the victim too, right? Like they might be complaining to other people about how badly they're being treated by you.
Oh, for sure.
And solidifying that victim narrative even further.
Exactly. And this is where that external validation is so important.
Right.
You have people that you trust.
Yeah.
Who can offer a different perspective.
So you're not just relying on what the narcissist is saying or what they've told other people.
Right. You have your own support system.
Okay. So we've got emotional blackmail. We've got triangulation. What else?
Another one that's often overlooked, especially early on in a relationship, is love bombing.
Love bombing. What is that? That sounds kind of nice.
It can seem that way at first.
Yeah.
It's when the narcissist overwhelms you with attention, affection, gifts, promises.
Okay.
It's like this whirlwind romance that just feels so intoxicating.
But there's a catch, right?
Of course, there's a catch. It's all about creating that sense of intense connection and dependency.
Okay.
Very quickly. And then once you're hooked, they can start withdrawing that affection
Oh.
and using it as leverage to control your behavior.
So it's like an emotional roller coaster
It is, yeah.
where they control the ups and downs.
Exactly. And this can be really disorienting for autistic people
Yeah.
who, value sincerity and honesty.
Right.
They might just misinterpret that initial intensity as genuine.
Right. So again, it plays on that trusting nature.
It does.
Yeah. Okay, love bombing, that's a new one for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to keep an eye out for that one. But it's all starting to connect now, right? Like all these different tactics.
Yeah, see, I told you.
They all have that same like underlying thread.
Once you understand those core dynamics of manipulation, that need for control, the lack of empathy, you start to see how these different tactics are all connected.
Yeah. Like we've been given a decoder ring for understanding manipulative behavior.
Exactly. And this knowledge is so empowering because it allows you to set boundaries to protect yourself and make choices that are aligned with your well-being.
So what have we learned today? I think the biggest takeaway is recognizing and resisting manipulation is a journey.
It is.
It's not a destination, right? You're constantly learning and growing and refining your own
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And self-awareness is the first step to creating that life where you're not controlled by others, but by your own values and choices.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful and helpful. Until next time, take care and be kind to yourselves.